Chapter 3. Hunter walked out of his room wearing a suit and tie. Hayley and Max both looked at him and shared worried faces. "So, they called an emergency meeting?" Max asked. "Yeah. We have to report to the house in 15 minutes. The whole fraternity and pledges." "This is bad. Can you imagine how many news vans are gonna be on our campus today?" Hayley said, turning to Max. "The meeting is only 30 minutes. They're gonna get us in and out of there," Hunter said. "They probably don't want the pledges being pressured by the press. I assume the members already know how to react," Max said. Hunter nodded and walked to the door. He motioned for them to go ahead. "You'll have to leave first. I can't be seen leaving with you both. They'll suspect something." Max and Hayley looked at each other and walked to the door. They both hugged him as they walked out. He stood in the doorway and watched them walk to the elevator. It felt as if his last bit of normacy was leaving with them. Before the elevator made its way up, Hunter ran to catch them. "Can we all meet at your place tonight?" he asked Max. "Hayley lives too close to the house, and the tower has way too many eyes." Max smiled and said, "Of course. Let's just make it a sleepover." Hunter smiled and watched them get on the elevator. His face grew sour as he walked to it and waited. "This is just the beginning," he thought. Once Hunter made it to the Omega house, silence had descended over Martin Street. Some of the other pledges started arriving. It looked like a sea of suits entering the house. Everyone was assembled in the living room in front of the fraternity's coat of arms. The large image was gold and maroon, with an eagle perched at the top and two Latin phrases. At the top, condemnat quod non intellegunt, which means they condemn that which they do not understand. On the bottom, non duco duco, which means I am not led, I lead. Under the coat of arms was an open space with a podium, followed by 2 rows of chairs for members. The pledges began lining up like soldiers behind the 2 rows. Parker, Eric's brother, stood behind the chairs with the other pledges. Evan made his way in last and stood next to him. Everyone's eyes were on Evan, who had just left the hospital with Antonio's parents. Parker leaned over and whispered to Evan, "What did they say?" Evan stood looking forward and stone-faced. "They're not happy, obviously," he answered. "They're going to speak with the press, and Mr. Ricci has a meeting with President Cook." "Seriously? Shit," Parker responded. "What do you expect? Mr. Ricci is a powerful man. He's like a king to the School of Medicine. He's gonna put up a fight," Evan said. "Where do we stand?" Parker asked. "I'm gonna stand with Tony and his family. I don't know where you want to stand, but I know where I am," Evan said quietly. Parker looked at Evan for a moment and turned back toward the seal. The fraternity members entered, took their seats in the 2 rows, and the pledges stood at attention. Hunter took in everything. He felt like a camcorder collecting evidence. He knew the importance of the fraternity's secrecy, but the death of Antonio threw all that pride out the window. He was starting to question who he could trust, and at that moment, only 2 people came to mind, and they weren't in the room. The executive members, Eric, the vice president, Connor, the secretary, and Pete, the treasurer, entered, and Chad made his way to the podium. He took a breath and clasped his hands together. "It is with great sorrow that I inform you all that our brother, Antonio Ricci, has passed away." Hunter and the pledge next to him exchanged looks. The Omega Brotherhood never referred to a pledge as a brother until they were adorned. "This is a dark time for our brotherhood, and I can only imagine the pain you all must feel. but we must move forward and keep our heads high. We must do this for our fallen brother, Chad said. Evan made eye contact with Pete, who was already straight-faced, but there was disappointment in his gaze. Let us have a moment of silence for Brother Antonio Ricci, Chad said. The entire room bowed their heads. After a few seconds, Chad lifted his head and stomped his left foot 2 times. The brothers followed suit. There must be a significant amount of uncertainty, so I will set the record straight. With the untimely death of Antonio, we will move forward with the adornment of one pledge, Antonio Ricci, Chad said. The room was dead silent. This is an honorary gesture. The rest of our selected pledges will be adorned on a later date that will remain confidential. Just be ready when we call. As you can imagine, this incident will bring a large amount of attention to the fraternity. Moving forward, you are now sworn to secrecy. You will not speak a word about what happened last night, today, or any day, Chad said. Hunter looked down and back up at the front. I already broke that promise, he thought. The press will be here soon. You will stay as unseen as possible. Do not leave your dorms or apartments for anything that is not essential for the next few hours. Remember, we are watching. Do not disappoint us, Chad said. He looked around the room and shared a long moment of eye contact with Hunter and stomped twice. The room followed suit, and he exited with the executive members. Evan made his way out before any of the other pledges, and Parker caught up with him outside. Parker looked around and whispered, I honestly don't know who to trust outside of you. Evan looked at Parker and said, I'm going to be real with you. Trust yourself. I appreciate your thought, but I have a feeling that in the next few days, it's going to be every man for himself. Evan walked off, and Parker pursed his lip. Hunter stood confused and scared as the rows of members exited the room. As he walked out the front door, Parker caught up with him and walked alongside him. What was that all about? Parker asked. I'm not sure. And honestly, I don't think I want to know. Hunter answered. Did you do something? Parker asked. I can't think of anything. I don't know. I always felt unseen, for the most part. Does he know about what I said to Max and Hayley? Were we too loud? Hunter thought. I'm gonna head to my girlfriend's place to stake out, but I'll say this. He only gives you that look if he admires you or hates you. I hope you're not the latter, my friend, Parker said as he walked away. Hunter stood there for a moment and glanced at the Omega house and walked quickly toward campus. God, I hope it's the first one. The press descended on Winchester Phillips campus like eagles flying down to devour a prey. Max watched the press vans zoom down Broomfield Street toward campus. He checked his phone and saw texts from Hunter and Hayley saying they were on their way with food. They fought feverishly, but Max got his way. Xander's Burgers. His roommates were spending the night at a friend's apartment for a video game tournament, so the 3 of them had the room all to themselves. Max heard a knock at the door and ran to answer. Hunter barged in with a heavy bag of Xanders, and Max had the widest grin on his face. Hayley followed and sat on the futon next to the window. Thanks, Hunter, Max said, grinning. Hunter looked around with a fake smile and said, Oh, great, more grease. Max sat on his desk and Hunter handed him his box. A double bacon cheeseburger with a side of the world-famous Xander's curly fries. A Coke cherry to top it off. They all sat down to eat, and Max couldn't help but be nosy. So, tell us, what happened? Hunter took a large gulp of his pop and looked at both of them. I'm scared, guys. Why? Hayley asked. Hunter sat for a moment, shook his head, and whispered, I think Chad knows I told you all. Max hopped off the desk and sat next to Hunter. Hunter looked at him, then at the door, then motioned for them to lean in closer. They all leaned in. This is what happened. Martin Street was a frenzy of press fans and reporters lined up in front of the Omega House. Inside the house, a couple of members peeked out the window through the curtains, and others were in the living room talking amongst themselves. Stay put, and if you need food, have it delivered, Eric said to Parker through his phone. Eric hung up, and Connor approached him. Is Parker okay? Connor asked. Yeah, he's fine, just a little worried. Aren't we all? When do you think they'll leave? Eric looked toward the window, then back at Connor. God only knows. Hopefully before midnight. Chad came downstairs and everyone turned toward him. He walked over to Eric and said, How's your brother? He's all right. He's not my concern. Chad motioned for Eric and Hunter to follow him to a back room. He looked at them and scratched his head. I'm afraid Evan will say too much, but if we kick him out of the pledge class, it'll look sketchy. Maybe he'll drop out and we won't have to deal with him, Connor said. He'll still be a problem. He's close to Antonio's parents. I have a feeling he'll spill everything, and they'll use it against us. He knows too much, and they'll have too much power, Chad said. Also, this Rami 626 character, we gotta figure out who that prick is. Calvin is a problem, too. I mean, he wouldn't spill Brotherhood's secrets, but he may try to come at you since it involves his little brother. You know how protective he is of Evan. And you two didn't exactly have a peaceful exchange of power, Eric said. Fuck Calvin, Chad retorted. He didn't like my ideas for leading a new Brotherhood, but he can bitch about it all he wants. He doesn't have a card to play in this game other than to turn alums against me, but my father won't let that happen. Any other thoughts? Ideas? What about the NDA? Connor asked. Unfortunately, I just found out that Evan is 17, which means he's a minor? Eric said, cutting him off. Chad nodded. His NDA may be void. I know someone that may help, but you'll have to actually call him. And be cordial, Eric said. Who's that? Chad asked. You just mentioned him, Eric said to Chad. Chad looked at him confused, then it finally registered. He took a breath and shook his head. Lace up, boys. It's going to be a long night. Max and Hayley sat silently after hearing what conspired at the meeting. Hunter got up and looked out the window, while Max dazed off. He thought about the time he met Antonio. Max had just taken his seat at orientation when a tall, curly-haired guy walked in, and all the girls' attention lasered in on him. Antonio looked around, saw Max, and smiled. He walked over to him and asked, Hey, is this seat taken? Max looked up. Yeah, by you. Antonio smiled, sat down, and placed his Winchester drawstring bag on the floor. Max looked around and lifted his right eyebrow. You draw quite a bit of attention. Antonio looked around, blushing awkwardly. Yeah, I don't know why, though. Max laughed. Maybe if I had that kind of power, I would have a girlfriend by now. Antonio looked at him and said, Be yourself, and she'll come along. Max smiled and reached out his hand. Max. Antonio grasped it and responded, Tony. Max snapped back and looked at Hunter and said, I want to know what really happened. Hunter turned around, confused. I didn't lie. Max cocked his head. You know what I mean. Hunter closed his eyes and responded, Max, please don't turn this into something more than what it is. It's not some conspiracy. Hunter rubbed his eyes and walked back to the window. You know there's more to this story. Any other fraternity would have called the police. Others have when this kind of thing happens. And the NDAs? There's more to this, Max said. Hunter ignored him. Please, help me, Max said. How? I want to, Max stammered. What? Hayley questioned him. Max took a breath and looked at Hunter again. I want to infiltrate the Omegas. Hayley scratched her head, and Hunter turned around. Are you fucking kidding me? Hunter, an innocent kid just lost his life. We have to find out more, Max said. Max, that fraternity is crawling with lawyer parents. Chad's dad is literally the state attorney general, Hunter said. Max looked Hunter in the eyes. We can bypass that and get to the truth. They can keep others out, even Antonio's parents, if they fight hard enough, but not one of their own. But what if Chad hates me? What if he finds out? Hunter asked. Max looked at Hayley, then back at Hunter. We'll protect you. But we gotta try. You may be the admired one, Parker talked about, but we'll never know if you don't take the chance, Max said. Hayley looked at Hunter and smiled. It's crazy, but Max is a beast. We may be able to swing this. Plus, I want those assholes taken down, especially after they oogled me and my friends when we passed their little house walking toward downtown. Something ain't right about those rich white boys. Max gave Hayley a concerned look, and Hunter did the same. Hunter took a breath and rubbed his lip. I don't know, Hunter said as he walked toward the window. He looked out for a moment and turned back to them. If we do this, I gotta know I can trust you. There's a lot at stake, Hunter said. Max and Hayley shook their heads, agreeing. We got your back, Hayley said with confidence. Hunter walked up to Max and took him by the shoulders. You better write a bomb-ass article, little Carl Bernstein. Max smiled and said, Let's go. Max tape number 2. This is tape number 2. At first, I was just making these to air out my thoughts, maybe publish a podcast with them, but now I kind of have an important reason to make them. Antonio Ricci is dead. This is now an investigation, and I'm going to write the best story for it, whether it's in the journal or not. This will probably not hit you as hard when you hear it in the future, but right now, I'm frozen. I'm still trying to make sense of it. It already feels like a dark haze has descended on our campus. After watching the video a couple of times, I have to wonder, how long did it take for Tony to get to the hospital? And if they waited, could he have been saved if they hadn't drugged their feet? I didn't know him that well, but we did meet, and he had this thing about him, this kindness that you couldn't quite describe. It wasn't fake or opportunistic. He was real. That trashy frat didn't deserve him. And it's insane to think that he lost his life at the hands of some stupid, bizarre ritual. Who do these guys think they are? Like I said in the tape earlier, it's almost a crime to criticize them in public, so me even considering taking this on as a story would be risky. I'd also have to convince our editor to even let me. That's going to be crazy, considering the fact that everyone is going to want to write this thing. I have a feeling it's going to be a tough competition at the journal. But I have an advantage, an inside source that will actually speak. This is not a normal fraternity. This is our skull and bones, I guess. Ah, God help me. These next few days are going to be a roller coaster. My friends and I are going to infiltrate the fraternity. How frighteningly exciting. It's going to be tough, but hopefully when you listen to this in the future, or present for you folks, you'll say, hey, he did it, and brought some truth to the surface. Or you'll say, rest in peace, Max. You fought the good fight. For my sake, let's hope it's not the latter. Chapter 4. The Omega House had fallen silent. It was midnight, and most of the Brotherhood's members had either gone to bed or silently talked in their rooms. Parents of some of the members had made their way to campus and bum-rushed the house with questions and concerns. Some even took their children with them for fear of police involvement. No one knew what to think, what to say, what to feel. The fraternity hadn't been in the spotlight like this in a while. Controversial questions had been raised about the group in the same way they would with any fraternal organization, but this was the first death scandal, and Chad Rivers feared what it would do to his reputation. I had 1 year left, and this is how it all ends. Chad sat at the edge of his bed, eyes closed. He knew that the storm was just beginning. He was at the helm, and the very existence of the Brotherhood relied on the moves he was about to make. Chad heard a car door shut outside his window. When he got up and looked out, he saw a man dressed in a black suit walking toward the house. Connor let the man in, and Chad walked over to his desk and sat down. He took a breath and closed his eyes. I can do this. A knock was heard at his door. Come in, he said from his desk. The door opened, and he turned around. It was the help he'd been waiting for, and the sharp judgment he feared. His father. Evan made his way through a hallway on the 8th floor of the Regis Hotel. He walked up to a room and knocked on the door. Leo opened the door and welcomed Evan in. Vanessa looked up, saw him, and smiled. She got up and hugged him. Hello, sweetheart. We talked to your parents. They were worried sick, hoping you were okay. I reassured them that we'd take care of you. They'll be up soon, Leo said. My dad just called me. He said he'll meet with you all in the morning. Leo took a chair and sat it in front of Evan. Take a seat, Evan. Evan sat down, and Leo sat in front of him next to Vanessa. Evan, we need to know what happened. Every detail, Leo said. Evan looked down and fidgeted nervously. I know you're afraid, but Tony lost his life. This is fresh, and it hurts. It's gonna hurt for some time. But the only way for him to get justice in all of this is if you speak. We will protect you, but we can't if you stay silent, Leo said. Evan looked up and made eye contact with Leo. He took a deep breath and said, It all started with the final initiation, the 4 corners. Tony was kind of nervous about it, but Evan stopped. Evan? Vanessa looked him in the eyes. It's all right. I egged him on. I wanted us to make it through together. If I had any idea this would happen, I would have never done it. I'm so sorry, Evan said as tears fell down his face. It's not your fault, Evan, Leo said. Vanessa hugged him and said, Tonight isn't the night. Let him get some rest. We can meet when your parents get here. Leo nodded, and Vanessa walked Evan to the door. He paused, turned toward her, and said, I want to tell you both something about Chad while it's fresh on my mind. Vanessa looked at Leo, and they both looked at Evan. Chad, he wasn't a huge fan of Tony. I think he may have had something to do with his death. Not because of negligence, but intentionally. Chad's father, Philip, sat across from him and gazed into his eyes with a laser focus. He was a little shorter than his son, but still tall. He had short brown hair and brown eyes that could peer through anyone's intentions. Lawyer's instincts, he called it. "This is the last thing I thought I'd have to come up here for," Philip said. "Dad, I'm sorry." "Save it. We've got business to handle. No use in wasting time with apologies. If you were sorry, you would have let this happen," Philip responded. Chad lowered his head. "The police will question you all. The goal is to divert as much blame from you as possible," Philip said. Chad looked up, and his father raised his head. "You said you weren't there when the incident happened, right?" "Yes," Chad responded. "Good. And when you arrived, what did you instruct the pledges and members to do?" Philip asked. Chad stammered. "Speak up," Philip said through gritted teeth. "I instructed them to leave him," Chad responded with apprehension. He looked up at his father, whose eyes had grown full of rage. "Stupid! Why would you leave the kid just laying there?" Philip yelled. "I'm sorry. Chad stammered as his father cut him off. "How many people were there?" "I'm not sure. Is there a video? Did someone take a video?" Philip yelled. I don't think maybe Chad stammered. Philip walked to the window and stared out. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and walked to the door of the room. He opened it and looked back at Chad and said, "I'll take you to the station myself. We'll get your questioning done. Don't speak to anyone. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir," Chad responded. Philip took one last look at Chad and walked out. Chad sat in his chair, silent and still. He looked toward the door and waited to hear the front door downstairs close. Chad closed his eyes and clasped his hands together, leaning into the silence. He heard the door downstairs close, and he walked over to the window and watched his father drive off. The revving engine pierced through the night air. Connor walked into Chad's room and said, "Are you all right?" Chad turned around and said, "No. I feel like that's going to be my feeling for a while." Hunter got a text from his dad and rolled over in his sleeping bag to read it. "Meet me in the morning. You may be questioned tomorrow." Hunter's face grew worried. He looked up at the ceiling and thought, "What have I gotten myself into?" Chapter 5. Hunter got up and eased out of Max's dorm as quietly as possible. Hayley and Max were both still asleep, and he didn't want to disturb them. He walked down the hall and made his way to the front circle drive, where a Mercedes-Benz was waiting. He knew that car anywhere. The sun was just starting to rise as Hunter opened the car's door. "Hey, Dad," Hunter said as he looked at his father, Kevin, gripping the wheel and holding a concerned face. Kevin was what Hunter expected to look like in 28 years. He shared Hunter's green eyes and red hair. The only difference is that Kevin was 2 inches shorter and had facial hair. He always told Hunter that the whiskers come with wisdom. "Where were you when all this happened?" Kevin asked. Hunter looked at his dad, then out the window. "We were all in the back room. It was pretty crowded. I had just finished the 4th corner, and I ran back when I heard the commotion," Hunter said. "Thank God," This would have been harder to deal with if you were in deeper, Kevin said. Hunter looked at his dad. What all do you know? I talked to some of the brothers from my generation. They have kids in the Brotherhood right now, and they filled me in on just about everything. Kevin pulled off onto Broomfield, and Hunter watched the sun gleam over Edgerton Stadium. The marching band's early morning rehearsal echoed in the distance as he let his mind drift off. He tried to ignore the anxiety he was about to feel when he walked into the police station. Chad Rivers sat next to his father in the interrogation room of the Winchester Police Headquarters. The two detectives, Stanley and Fulton, were taking notes when Chad looked at his father, and he gave him a reassuring nod. All right, so you weren't at the party when the incident happened, but you did see the aftermath? Stanley asked Chad. Yes. So, was this game orchestrated by you and the executive members of your fraternity? Fulton asked. Chad looked over at his father, then back at Fulton. No, the pledges were urged to create their own challenge and facilitated without us, which is why we weren't present. Fulton looked at Stanley, then back at Chad. So you had nothing to do with the ritual called the Four Corners? I answered your question, officer. Is there something else you'd like to know? By the way, there's video evidence of where I was. I'd be happy to provide it for you. We'll let you know if we need that. What was your initial reaction to Antonio's injury? Fulton asked. Chad looked over at his father. Philip nodded, and Chad took a moment and looked at Fulton. When I arrived, Antonio moaned and squirmed on the couch. He was conscious. I told one of the pledges or brothers to get him some ice. I forgot who. Stanley leaned in and asked, So, you didn't think it would be a better idea to have him go to the hospital for a possible concussion? Well, ambulance bills are quite expensive. He was still conscious and could move. I didn't see a need to add a financial burden on him. I've hit my head quite a few times, and ice was enough. Stanley lifted his eyebrow. An ambulance bill is hardly a financial burden for this family, don't you think? Let's not make assumptions, Detective. My son made a decision in good faith. That young man's injury is hardly his fault, Philip said sharply. Stanley and Fulton looked at each other. Fulton stood up and walked toward the door. He opened it and said, If we need to know any more, we'll reach out. Chad stood up with his father, and they exited the room. He's hiding something, Fulton said. When you're that rich, you have to, Stanley responded. Don't worry, we'll get it out of him. Either him or any of these boys. One of them will squeak, Fulton said as he sat down and flipped through his notes. As Hunter and his father walked toward the entrance, Chad and his father passed them, and Chad made direct eye contact with Hunter. It was as if time slowed down as their paths crossed. Two generations of Omega men, the old and the new, with the same agenda: survival. Kevin pulled up to the tower, and before Hunter could get out, his father reached over and grabbed his shoulder. Hunter turned, and Kevin looked him sternly in the eyes. Be careful. This is not a minute incident. Watch who you become friends with, and be careful with the Brotherhood. You did good today, but if you step on the wrong toes, you may get taken down with them. Hunter scratched his nose and leaned over in the seat. Hunt, I want you to be the best you can be. These guys are something else, but you got everything in you to rise above them. Hell, you might even become the president of the Brotherhood one day, Kevin said, eliciting an awkward smile from Hunter. You come from a good family. You were the captain of the cross-country team. You've got lion's blood running through your veins, kid. Hunter smirked and looked down. Be careful. And if things ease up, with these guys, rise. Rise to the top. You may lose some friends on the way, but you have to do what's necessary to succeed. Smile, wave, and get the gold. That might even mean losing dead weight. People that aren't on your level. That may even mean losing Max. Hunter looked at his father with a sharp frown. Kevin looked toward the road. I should head off, Hunt. Call me. Keep me in the loop. Hunter got out of the car and stood watching from the curb. He nodded his head and walked toward the door. Hunter watched as his father pulled off, then went into the building. A couple of students sat in the lobby talking about Antonio's death. Hunter eavesdropped as he made his way to the elevator. He took a breath and closed his eyes on the slow ride up. Once he got to his floor, he pulled out his phone and began texting Max and Hayley when he heard a voice say, "Hello, Brother Toberski." Hunter looked up and saw Chad standing next to his door. "Brother Rivers? What are you doing here?" Hunter said. "We've got some business to attend to," Chad said. As Hunter opened his door, his mind began racing. Why is he here? Did he find out about Max and Hayley? Did I say too much at the police station? Once they walked into the room, Chad closed the door behind them. Chad walked up to Hunter and looked him in the eyes. "Are you afraid?" Hunter looked down, then back at Chad. "No." "Good. This will only take a moment. And I hope that when we're finished here, we'll be on the same page. We have a lot to talk about, Hunter." Hunter knew he was in deep now, and the next few moments would prove whether he could dig himself out. This is HAZE Book One, an audiobook fiction podcast in 6 parts, written and narrated by me, Darius Buckley. For more information about HAZE, visit dariusstorylab.com/HAZE.